Welcome to Two Girls, One Garbage Can, the Auspol podcast where we try and make sense of the garbage can state of Australian politics by examining what's happened before and trying to make sense of how we fucking got here. It doesn't always work, but we try. I am your host, Tamara.
And my name is Maddie. And today Tamara's got some interesting stuff for us. More recent history than some of the episodes we've done recently.
It is. It's a little bit more recent.
It is one of the biggest cases of dropping the political bag that's happened in recent memory. So take it away, Tamara.
Absolutely. So obviously, very recently, we've had a lot of upheaval in Australian politics, and there's been a lot said about the changing landscape of Australian politics. But in all honesty, really, not much has changed. And this is something that we've learnt as we continue going through the history of Australian politics up until today. So we're flashing forward a little bit today to the 2019 federal election. In the days directly following the 2019 federal election, Labor's shock loss was blamed on everything and everyone, from wealthy retirees to quiet property investors to Clive Palmer to the middle class to Queensland as a whole, just the state of Queensland, to climate change skeptics and everyone and everything in between.
Hold on a second. You're saying this is the one thing that millennials didn't get fucking blamed for?
This is the one thing they did not blame millennials for.
Jesus Christ. We've killed 7 million different industries. We're responsible for both the growth and the death of cafe culture. Like, what the fuck?
Yes. Cafe culture exploded because of us and died because of us. Napkins, we killed the napkin industry.
Yep.
But the napkin that is SHorten, apparently that one wasn't on us.
What a pleasant change.
Pleasant surprise. Now, unfortunately, this is you're gonna have to do a little bit of bearing with me, because this gets so fucking ridiculous as we go through. When SHorten climbed on stage with Plibersek on the 28th of the 4th, 2019, to announce Labor's $4 billion childcare policy, the announcement was met with thundering applause. It was their biggest campaign announcement and was exactly the kind of policy that would have changed the game. Labor's Federal Election HQ found out about the policy the same day as the Australian public. No ads had been prepared, and the closest that it came to a focus group was the announcement itself. No polling work had been done to find out how to deliver this information to Australian families, and the closest that it got to any kind of notoriety or advertising was a dot point on another campaign promise advertisement. Despite it literally being the biggest announcement that they had made up until that point, they had absolutely no clue how they were going to disseminate this information to the Australian public. And in fact, it was only after they announced it that the ALP campaign director, Noah Carroll, began researching how best to ensure this information was disseminated to Australian families and and to do some polling over the best way to deliver this information. Yeah. So suddenly, when we find out information like this, suddenly we all feel a little bit less shocked at the idea that Labor lost the election, right? I don't know, just finding out. Just finding out that Labor's Federal Election HQ found out about that policy the same day as the Australian public.
The fact that bro jumped on stage and dropped a $4 billion package like Joe Biden drops $20 billion to Israel. Like, the fuck?
The fuck, yeah.
Didn't run it by anyone.
No. Now, this could obviously, in hindsight, can be seen as a reaction to the 2nd of the 4th announcement by the government at the time. Josh Frydenberg had announced a surplus in the budget, and this had rattled Labor. Labor had been counting on the really bad state of the economy at the time and the promises that they were going to make to help correct it and bring us back into the black to carry us through that election. When Frydenberg announced a budget surplus on the 2nd of the 4th, Labor suddenly started dipping back into their policy pile to find something they could use to then change the conversation away from this latest announcement, from Frydenberg's latest announcement. If they'd been paying a lot of attention to the Australian public, though, and how the Australian public received the announcement of this surplus, they probably wouldn't have been as worried as what they were. However, this was also just a symptom of larger problems within the ALP's 2019 election campaign. These symptoms can definitely shed some light on how SHorten and the ALP lost what had been thought of as the unlosable election. The election was held on May 18, and in the lead up to the election, polls had been reporting again and again and again and again that a Labor victory was all but in the bag. However, the polls that Labor were getting were not necessarily saying the same thing. Confusion over how to read these polls, however, left many of the higher-ups in the Labor Party just as shocked as the Australian public by Labor Party's defeat on May 18. Once again, if they'd been paying attention, they would not have been so shocked. Getting into this a little bit, the polls in particular is something that I really want to spend a bit of time talking about, so we're going to breeze through a bit of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There are basically 5 big key areas that we can talk about if we want to talk about the election failure. We've got the personality, Bill Shorten's personality, the policy, Labor's overwhelming, the flooding of policies throughout that campaign and how badly they were delivered, the campaign manager, and both his ineptitude and inability to effectively deliver information, the Clive Palmer effect, which definitely had an impact on this campaign. There's no doubt about that. And the culture. Now, the culture of Labor in particular has to be the number one reason that they lost the unlosable election. And the culture was something that had unfortunately developed over a number of years through the Rudd-Gillard years, where Labor learnt the wrong lessons from the mistakes that they had suffered during the Rudd-Gillard tumultuous years. In order to be able to sort of understand how all of this happened, we're going to have to go through it bit by bit by bit. And I apologise because, again, with my chaotic brain, I know that a lot of people are going to be like, hang on, wait, how does this all link up? But just by giving you a bit of an overview as to where we're going, I'm hoping it's going to make it a little bit easier for people to understand. Starting off with the policies, because as we saw from that $4 billion announcement, the policies obviously were a big part of Labor's election campaign, and their inability to adequately convey all of the information in these policies to the Australian public was a key factor in the reason they lost.
Communications, man.
Yes.
Politics.
Communications. I made this point to someone when they were talking about Joe Biden. Everyone was going, oh, everyone's making a big deal about Joe Biden being such a sucky president, but really, what does a president even need to do? And I made the point, communicate. The only thing you need a president to do, arguably, is to communicate with the public. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden cannot fucking do that. End of discussion. End of.
Yep.
Now, taking any big policy to an election is risky if you are coming at it from outside of government. Whenever you are looking at an election strategy, and this is, just a little bit of behind the scenes for you all, when you have an election, whoever is in government has a lot more chance to talk about what they are going to do after the election, to talk about the campaigns, their policies, and the work that they are doing than anyone who is trying to get into government. It does not matter what is going on, because you can have press conferences about things that are completely unrelated to the election and slip in talking points about your election promises. If you are going to an election from office, you can afford to make big policy proposals. You can afford to make big changes. If you are going to election from outside of office, if you are coming in as the opposition, you can't. You have nowhere near as much opportunity to try and explain your policies. So if you are coming in from opposition, you are coming in from a weakened position. You are on the defense from the get-go. And the Labor Party did not approach this election like that at all. They decided to take a different approach, which I can understand why, given how badly the LNP was doing in terms of they had just had, the Turnbull fucking Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just had a big spill of their own.
And robo-debt.
Robo-debt. They obviously thought that the LNP were in such a weakened position that they could afford to take this big, bold, multiple policy platform to the election. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I could not even figure out how many policies they had. I lost count at about 40 different policies that were just financial, that had a financial element to them, that were literally directly related to businesses, changes to the way business expenses were being handled, changes to the way taxes and things were being done. I counted about 40 policies that they had taken to the election that had financial elements to them that needed explanation. There was no fucking way they were going to be able to explain all those policies on the campaign trail. It just wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Taking big policies to an election from opposition is a risky game to begin with. You're at a massive disadvantage in terms of all of these communication opportunities. And for a Labor campaign, you've got the double whammy of having a bad reputation when it comes to spending and taxation. Now, Labor announced more than 20 fully costed taxation-based policies during their campaign period. Fully costed means there is a lot of information to disseminate about each of these policies.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of information. Okay. I feel like it's, oh God, this is the other problem. I've now had 3 weeks, guys, to just read and reread and reread all of this. And so there's all these bits and pieces that are popping into my brain at the same time. So one of the other big problems that we had is the way that SHorten governed, the culture that had sprung up, okay? And this is one of the reasons why this happened, okay? Because everyone was really quick to blame Bill Shorten and his personality, public-facing personality, but there were bigger issues within the party. So, the culture. During the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, Labor learned the wrong lessons. Shorten used policy promises as a way to get ministers on side, and his financial team, Chalmers and Bowen, who's finance and Chalmers being treasurer, realised very quickly that they might be able to tinker around the edges of these policy, but they did not have the ability to pull anything out, to cancel anything, to veto anything, to just say this isn't going to work as far as financial or budgetary concerns. This isn't going to work. Like, this is too much. We're not going to be able to. So the culture that had developed among Labor was Shorten wanted everyone on side. He wanted to get unity and harmony. There weren't going to be any arguments. And so everyone was going to get what they wanted. And it was up to Bowen and Chalmers to make it happen, basically. And this fucking didn't work, obviously. This just meant that they had far too many policies with far too much information in them, far too much detail to try and be, explained to people. And taking all of these big policy ideas to an election from opposition was already a fucking risky situation, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Since the 1950s, only 3 ALP governments have won from the opposition. Gough Whitlam, Hawke, and Rudd. What do all these 3 have in common? Like, you cannot think of any of them without knowing, like, anyone who fires their employees today is a bum. Like, what do we know about all of them? Like, their personalities. They were known for their personalities more than they were known for their policies half the time. And no one can say that about Shorten, okay? So to win from opposition is already a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And given the fact that since the 1950s, only 3 ALP governments have won from opposition, 1950s being important because this is when every Australian household got a TV. The way we communicated changed remarkably in the 40s and 50s. So only 3 ALP governments have won from opposition. Whitlam, Hawke and Rudd, all with massive big personalities, and this is not something anyone could accuse Shorten of having.
You say they've only 3 have won from opposition. I'm just confused.
Sorry. No, I was talking about prior to Shorten. I was talking about prior to 2019. Sorry. So I'm sorry. I'm speaking from a position of why the fuck did we choose Shorten?
Right. Okay. I was going to say, the fuck?
Since the 1950s, only 3 ALP governments have won from opposition, Whitlam, Hawke and Rudd, and all of them have big personalities. Even if you have a look at Albanese winning from opposition, what was the big thing we were hearing about Albo beforehand? Everyone was sharing those like thirst edits of Albo when he was younger. Everyone was sharing memes of him when he was younger, campaigning. Everyone was sharing clips of him at protests and things. You know, it was all about the personality of Albo, even calling him Albo. All of that sort of stuff started happening. It's no one wins from opposition as a Labor member without that personality coming into play. And I have to actually play a video because I was planning on playing a video for this part of it.
The uncensored, unedited version of the podcast that includes the full Bill Shorten embarrassing himself meme clip is available on our Ko-fi subscription page for all members at all tier levels, including for one-off donations. One-off donations can access unedited versions of podcasts that have been released, but if you want to become a continual ongoing member, you can also access extra bonuses, including unreleased podcasts that the public don't get access to. So while you're over there checking out the unedited, uncensored version of this week's podcast, feel free to sign up and become a member so that you can enjoy the many additional benefits that are exclusive to our Ko-fi members.
Okay. Things I learned about Bill Shorten from this. His favourite time of day is morning. He eats tacos from the middle like a fucking weirdo. He is literally spare parts and he has no idea how to drive a stick shift. What the fuck, Mr. Shorten?
So this was the most popular social media post during the campaign. It was created by the official Liberal Party of Australia, and it was shared something like 100,000 times.
Good Lord.
The Australian National University's election study of over 2,000 voters showed that Bill Shorten has been the least popular party leader since the 1990s. That at that time, it was John Howard who was bringing in the GST, and he was actually in government at the time. So he wasn't trying to get elected. In fact, if he had won, he would have been the least popular prime ministerial candidate ever to have done so. So he was the least popular party leader outside of anyone who'd actually held the prime ministership. The only party leader less popular than him were prime ministers who were bringing in policies that people hated, like when John Howard announced the GST. That's the only way as a party leader you were able to be less popular than him, was by being in power and announcing shitty policies that people hated. Given the fact that if he had won, he would have been the least prime ministerial candidate ever to have done so, how on earth did this guy become the leader? How on earth did he get the top job? Well, many within the ALP refer to it as being his turn. And in fact, one of the people who was interviewed after the election, when the question was raised, how was it that he was able to get the top job? The response was, well, it's best to get it over with.
Oof.
So there was this idea. I know. Can you imagine your friends being like, oh, it's Jimmy's turn. Let's just get it over with. We'll lose this one. We'll get him next time. It's fine.
If we don't give him a shot, he's going to bitch about it for years.
Honestly, he'd been bitching about it for years. It was that point where it was like, oh, we have to get it over with. He's not going to stop unless we do. There was this feeling within the party that they had to, or he was never going to go the fuck away. Now, the fact is, Shorten may not have had the charm to pull in the Australian public, but he had the political finesse to topple not one, not two, not three, but 4 sitting Australian prime ministers. So while he didn't have the personality and he wasn't well liked, he was well known as having some very cunning, underhanded tactics that had done the ALP some massive favors. The reason we had all of this stuff that came out about the Liberal Party in relation to how, remember the helicopter, the bitch who used a helicopter to fly from Melbourne to Geelong? We found out about that because of Shorten's office. Shorten had a group of guys.
Okay.
He had a group of 6 guys who were all like juniors within the ALP office, who it was their job to just basically go through shit and find dirt. And they would then, without tying it to the ALP, so trying to do it in such a way that it wasn't coming from the ALP, would leak these stories to certain news articles, news groups to try and get some
negative coverage.
A couple of days later, after it had been out there for a bit, then Shorten would come out and say something like, I'm just so shocked to find, like, I cannot believe someone would use a helicopter. Like, it's an hour's drive. Who needs to fly a helicopter for a fucking hour's drive? Are you kidding? Meanwhile, Shorten had known about it for 6 months, acting shocked like he just found out, waiting for the perfect time to drop it. And that helicopter story is what ended Tony Abbott's political career.
Yep.
And that came out of Shorten's office.
I see.
Yeah, the story that ended Malcolm Turnbull's career came out of one of these Shorten guys. There is pretty much, even the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd, I mean, everyone lays the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd fiasco at Shorten's feet, but the power that this man wielded behind the scenes is probably the only reason that anyone gave him a turn at the front. There was a little bit of this idea with Shorten that he seemed to know how to play the game really well, even though he didn't have the personality, he didn't know how to sell himself, he didn't have the finesse necessary to be in front of the camera. He obviously knew how to play the game well, because he'd managed to topple 4 sitting prime ministers. Like, this is someone who knows what they're doing.
He must know how to do something right, at least.
He knows how to do something, absolutely. Then we get on to the campaign itself. It's his turn. We have to put him up. He's been asking for it for years. The culture that he's managed to get everyone on his side by giving them what they want, by promising him that he'll say yes to their part policies, and everyone's getting their policies that they want through, to the point that Labor have far too many fucking policies going to this election, and it's actually going to be one of the things that buries us. But anyway, the next thing that we kind of have to get to is the campaign itself. There are 3 factions within Labor, but there are 2 very distinct factions, the left and right faction. The right faction is a lot heavier weighted than the left faction, and people do not realise this. The right faction is very heavily weighted in the Labor. Everyone thinks that the left faction is heavier, and that's that they're not like the LNP. No, they are just like the LNP with a little bit of leftism. So on the left,
they're all a bunch of neoliberal
absolutely,
fucks.
Fucking absolutely. No doubt about it. Nothing else is to be said. 100% correct. So on the left, you've got people like Albanese and Plibersek. And on the right, you've got Chalmers, Shorten, Miles, Bowen, Fitzgibbon, O'Neill, Sanchez. So Chalmers and Bowen...
Sorry, you said Plibersek and Albanese are on the left, and my brain short-circuited.
Yeah. Plibersek and Albanese are on the left. So that's why Tanya Plibersek was Shorten's second, because she's on the left, Shorten's on the right. Plibersek is on the left. Albanese is on the left. That's what I mean. The left...
Somehow.
The left of the party is not the left of the party. I keep trying to point this out to people. It's very, very frustrating. Dreyfus is apparently on the left. Mark Dreyfus is apparently on the left. Really?
Jesus.
Yeah. So just...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So with this, the layout of the party, they kind of developed this big 7 who became in charge of making all of the decisions, all right? This is why the policy and the confusion and everything managed to go the way that it did without anyone having done any polling on these policies. The big 7 included Shorten, Plibersek, Wong, Don Farrell, Chris Bowen, Tony Burke, and Jenny McLean, who was later replaced with Brendan O'Connor. They made up the leadership team within the Labor Party, and they were the ones making all of the fucking calls when it came to this election campaign, basically. From the time that the election was called until the election day, the election team that had been put together for the election did not meet once. From the day the election was called to the day that the election was finalised, the election campaign team did not meet once. Not a single time. All decisions, everything that was being done was being run past these big 7. So Noah Carroll, who was the ALP campaign director, had never run a federal campaign before. He had run a state campaign, and he had run campaigns for Shorten's office before, but this was his first time running a big federal campaign, and he had some big ideas for how they were going to do things. These ideas did not pan out well at all. Now, I don't want to get too much into the ins and outs, but at one point, one of the staff from Bill Shorten's office was sent to attend the campaign management office where the campaign headquarters was. And reports from those who were present in the campaign office during this time stated that her job seemed to be to go from desk to desk asking what was happening and if anyone was doing anything and if anyone knew what was actually going on with the campaign.
Okay.
No one had a fucking clue what was going on with this campaign. Everyone was just in their fields doing their little jobs. There was no wider campaign direction. There was no bigger campaign. She kept asking if anyone had the campaign. Like, does anyone have the campaign plan? Does anyone have the campaign prospectus? No one had any fucking clue what she was talking about. Her job just seemed to be wandering around all day going, has anyone got a plan? Has anyone got a plan? And no one had a plan.
All right, Trash Pandas, we are going to have to leave it there for this week because we have been talking for a very long time and we are only halfway through this very absurd story.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's dive into the depths of the trash fire that is Australian politics. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, make sure to drop us a follow and do all the usual engagement things to help us get the word out there. You can find Tamara and myself on the social media links in the description below, but for now it's garbage day, so the girls gotta take the trash out. Bye.